Welcome to the Second Reading Podcast from the University of Texas at Austin.
The Republicans were in the Democratic Party because there was only one party.
So I tell people on a regular basis, there is still a land of opportunity in America. It's called Texas.
The problem is, these departures from the Constitution, they have become the norm.
At what point must a female senator raise her hand or her voice to be recognized over the male colleagues in the room?
And welcome back to the Second Reading Podcast. I'm Jim Henson, Director of the Texas Politics Project at the University of Texas at Austin. Very happy to be joined today by Gromer Jeffers Jr., longtime political writer for the Dallas Morning News and a longtime friend of the work that we do here at the Texas Politics Project. Gromer, thanks for being here.
Hey, man, I'm excited about this, and you're right. I'm a fan. I'm a fan of the work of what you all do at the Texas Politics Project. So.
Well, that's really kind. I was going to be conservative. I wouldn't even have gone as far as fan, so I really appreciate that. So, we invited Gromer today in part because I wanted to check in on your take, Gromer, on the state of the primary campaigns that are underway now in Texas as we get closer to the March 1st primary elections. I thought we'd start near the top of the ballot, though not literally at the top, by talking about the Attorney General contest in the Republican Party. The incumbent Republican, Ken Paxton, is seeking election to a third term. He's facing a crowded field, which early on drew a lot of interest in this race. But, as this race has shaped up, there were a lot of people who expect this to be one of the most competitive primary races this cycle. That may still be true, but you had a really interesting column that got my attention and the attention of a lot of other folks who kind of flagged it for me, that suggested that this race has not taken off the way we expected. So let's start. I'm curious, what in your reporting makes you think that this race isn't shaping up quite as competitively as we thought?
Well, just first of all, if you talk to the activists, some of the local party leaders, the folks on the ground, they say that they just don't feel not just their energy, but that the voters are engaged right now. And not just in that race, but in politics in general. And I don't know if that's because of election fatigue, where we're coming out of the holiday season, lingering effects of the pandemic. But you have that. You have a general sort of we're worried about politics later attitude with a lot of the voters. And given that this race was supposed to be the marquee race, because you had a seemingly wounded incumbent going against a statewide office holder and, the heir to the Bush dynasty and George P. Bush, and a very credible former Supreme Court justice who's run statewide before, and Eva Guzman, and now Louis Gohmert, a congressman. You just don't feel that energy and that enthusiasm about that race yet. And you mentioned yet, and I preface that it could heat up here in the last month or so, but certainly in the last few weeks. But certainly you don't feel it yet. And my sense of it is you might have to wait till you get down to two people to get the energy, to get the excitement, the anticipation of what will happen that you'll get normally for a race of this magnitude. But people are just aren't feeling it yet. At least that's what I'm told from conversations with activist party leaders and folks on the ground.
Well, you said, this race getting down to two people. I think it's, the question about this race, and I think the lingering assumption about the field looking in the way that you described it, where you have a candidate with at least name recognition in George P. Bush and, a very well-known, at least, an experienced statewide candidate, if somebody who's run, pretty far down on the statewide ballot, that is Eva Guzman. I don't want to sell her short. I mean, she's gotten a lot of votes statewide in past elections, and yet, this hasn't really taken off yet. I mean, you got some interesting feedback in that piece about whether we should assume there's going to be a runoff. I mean, the assumption there, as you say, this race will heat up when we get to two people, is that there'll be a runoff. When we polled on that race, and again, I do the horse race polling kind of under protest as far away as we did it in October. We had Paxton, I think, at 48 or 49%, right on the bubble.
Right.
I think you had, if I remember correctly in the article, correct me, you had Bill Miller, well-known consultant and general guru, I think, in Austin, saying that he thought there was a shot that this wouldn't reach a runoff. It sounds to me like you kind of assume there will be a runoff, and I'd assume is too strong a word, but that's still the odds-on bet.
I think so. Just what you just laid out. George P. Bush, while the base of the Conservative Party may be controlled by the hard right, in a sense, there's still some Republicans out there that are supportive of George P. Bush. I don't think it'll be a wipeout. He'll get some votes. And you mentioned Justice Guzman as well. She's spending a lot of money. Ultimately, she'll get to the point where she's running a credible campaign. It's very hard in that type of field. If you're Paxton with his legal problems, they're still there. There are some concerns about it. It may not be the majority of voters, but there are concerns. So I think that's enough to probably push this into a runoff. Would I be surprised if he won outright? Just mildly. I think there's a possibility.
Yeah.
I think Bill Miller and then the Matthew Langston was the other consultant I quoted in that article. They both think there's a possibility that he could win without a runoff. But I think just the mechanics of it, to me, suggest that he'll get in the 40s potentially, but there'll still be a runoff.
Right, and you mentioned him, and then I left him out. But and I think a real factor here is Louis Gohmert.
Right.
It's not easy to get to the right of Ken Paxton in terms of positioning in these races. That's funny to us, but it's also I could make that argument pretty objectively, I think. And we did see a movement, two people that were sort of percolating in this race, or Gohmert, who ultimately got in, and then we saw Matt Krause, very conservative state legislator, sort of make a feint toward this, and then once Gohmert got in, he got out, that's what it sort of looks like. And the Louis Gohmert factor looms pretty large here, because if you look at our data, Paxton is, for all his troubles, and I have a laundry list of the recent stories and the things that are pending on around the Ken Paxton presidency.
Right.
He's got a pretty secure position among what we would think of as the likely Republican primary electorate, which is more attentive, much very conservative, and very loyal to Ken Paxton. If there's anybody that might shave some of the core of his support off, it probably is more likely to be from the right than from the center right, I think.
Right. I agree. And Louis Gohmert talks or speaks to the portion of the Republican Party that you just described, the Paxton supporters, basically. He can speak to those voters with credibility. Because you're right, it's hard to get to the right of Ken Paxton, but it's very, very hard to get to the right of Louis Gohmert. And so if he has a gripe with Paxton, the most conservative voters of the party are probably more likely to listen to Gohmert and even know Gohmert more so than Eva Guzman and especially George P. Bush. So if Gohmert can find the resources to amplify his name, to get more familiar with most voters in Texas, especially voters outside of Tyler and that extreme conservative base that he appeals to, then yeah, he can be a factor because he can talk to those voters with credibility. They'll listen to him. They'll be like, hey, this is good old Louis. Oh, he's raising a concern. Oh, maybe we should really look at this. I think that could be the attitude there. If it's coming from George P. Bush about, hey, if Paxton is the nominee, the Democrat will win. Well, most conservative, ultra-conservative Republicans won't really hear that message from a George P. or even Justice Guzman. But if Gohmert is delivering it, they're like, really? Okay, well, let's consider this. So that would be the concern that Paxton would have with the Gohmert candidacy. But again, the question is, does he have the resources to make himself more of a factor?
Yeah, I mean, this cuts to the heart of what's really difficult about these primary campaigns. I mean, you're only, we're talking in a statewide race about probably not more than about 1.6 million Republican voters.
Right.
So you're not talking about having to sway a lot of people. And, and I think as we compare the two, one of the things that I think is interesting about this, if you really want to just reduce the heck out of it, is that Bush and Guzman have to make 2 points, or have to make 2 arguments. One, to a Republican primary electorate. The first argument is, I am conservative enough. And, I think that's particularly difficult for George P. Bush, given the Bush brand in the state.
Right.
And then, then the second argument is, the fact that Paxton is essentially damaged goods because of his problems, his ethical problems and some of the other things hovering out there. Louis Gohmert only has to make one of those arguments. And I think, it might be easy to underestimate, we think about these statewide primary races in very conventional terms about having to get your name out and having to achieve statewide name recognition. This is a much more targeted audience, and Louis Gohmert is already pretty well established among a big part of that primary audience. He may not be on the 3 network newscasts every night, but he is a regular fixture in conservative media, and that is, I suspect that they are banking on that being their secret weapon, that they don't need as much money.
And you raise a good point. He may not be on the local networks or the local news or the networks, but he's on Fox or whatever conservative outlet you choose. He's even sat in and done national radio programs when these hosts go on vacation, which don't underestimate that. I mean, sitting in for Hannity or whatever, the host. He's done that. And so his name could be more familiar with the most conservative voters than we imagine. And if that's the case, yeah, he doesn't need as much money. He doesn't really have to do a lot considering the smaller universe of primary voters. So we'll just have to see. I called him, he's the wild card. I totally agree with that. He is the wild card in the race. And I think if Paxton, he won't admit this, but I think if he's concerned about anybody at this point, it's not only Gohmert, but it's getting into a one-on-one race with Gohmert. Because if Gohmert can manage to make the runoff, oh, wow.
Yeah.
What does that race look like?
Yeah, really it changes the fundamentals.
Exactly. Because you can run against George P. Bush if you're Paxton, right? He's
right.
Not,
you can see that campaign from 100 miles
exactly.
away.
Yeah.
So let's look at some of these other races in your region, since we're lucky to have you here and really close to the ground in North Texas. You had a column this morning in the Dallas Morning News on the House District 114 race in the State House of Representatives, and that's the seat that's been vacated by the retiring John Turner,
right.
A Democrat, but a district that's also been redrawn.
Right.
Tell us about that race, because there's interesting things going on there. Most recently, the surprise entrance of a sort of tried and true older Democrat and an experienced politician, but kind of a surprise entrance by the 74-year-old John Bryant.
Yes, yes, and for those who I remember when I got to Texas, I one of my first races was the 2002 Senate race between Ron Kirk, the former Dallas mayor, and John Cornyn, the at that time he was a attorney general, but of course Cornyn won that race. In the primary was a guy named against Ron Kirk was a guy named Victor Morales, and Victor Morales is responsible for one of the great upsets in Texas political history. He drove a white pickup in 1996 around the state of Texas and beat John Bryant, a former congressman from Dallas, in the Democratic primary for Senate. That was my first sort of encounter with the legend of Bryant. But anyway, Bryant, before becoming a congressman, was a state rep and a distinguished state rep, and by most accounts did a good job. He's now trying to make a comeback for a couple of reasons. One, he thinks that the Texas legislature, is in bad need of an experienced Democrat, a leader, someone who knows how to fight against Republicans, frame arguments. He's critical of how Democrats are handling their business in the legislature, and he wants to come out of political retirement and make a difference. The interesting thing about that is that he's running against 4 other folks under 40. And this comes at a time when Democrats, as you know, Jim, they're trying to get fresher, younger. They're trying to get more people involved in the process. They're trying to identify more leaders. And so they have this diverse crop of candidates running, all, rising stars in their own rights. At least that's how they are described. And the potential there is for Bryant, the veteran, the political from another era, from last in office in the 90s, to sort of at least upset the development of finding new and fresh talent and sort of kind of take it from somebody. So we'll see how it plays out. But there's always this debate, Republicans too, but especially in the Democratic Party in Texas, because they've been in the wilderness for so long, is how do we get more people involved in the process? How do we freshen it up? How do we get younger leaders? And this goes against that if Bryant is successful.
And so, give us a feel for what the reaction is like. I mean, and people, I'm curious how much Democratic activists in the area and these candidates are being frank about their response to this, because I can't help but think that people found this a very unpleasant surprise and are not especially happy, are not especially open to the argument that former Congressman Bryant is making.
Right, exactly. And some of the candidates and some of their supporters have pointed this out, that in the early to middle 70s, Bryant was in his 20s when he became a member of the Texas legislature, and that they are trying to do what he did, which is contribute to the political discourse as a young person, as a person on the way up, and that they should be able to do that. So his argument, while you understand it, I mean, he says that the times are there's too much at stake for an inexperienced person to lead the district. You understand what he's trying to say, but on the other hand, he was in his 20s when he became a lawmaker, and when he made a difference in the legislature. So there's that. Ultimately, the voters are going to have to decide between the best candidates. I think the risk here is that with Bryant on one end and 4 others fighting it out, will one of the other candidates get enough traction to sort of match Bryant, someone will emerge and make the runoff, and then we'll see how the race changes then. But there are people upset that in an era where Democrats are trying to, not just younger, because I don't think age should be an issue, but different voices, diverse voices, new approaches, things like that, that you have someone who last held office in the 90s trying to come back and take it.
Yeah, I mean, I think one doesn't have to be overly sensitive here. I mean, I think the age thing here is a surrogate for all kinds of other things that are churning in the Democratic Party, both in the state and nationally. I mean, it's, the other four candidates are, as I recall, are reasonably ethnically diverse, and they're younger, as well as being younger.
Right, exactly. You have someone who came to the country from Colombia, the only woman in the race. There's that. There's a Tejano Democrat in the race. There's all sorts of folks with different backgrounds. And let me add this. So you also have a situation here in Dallas, in the Dallas area, where Eddie Bernice Johnson, the longtime congressman from District 30, the only congressperson District 30 has ever known, trailblazing Democrat. She's retiring after her term ends. Well, she's in her 80s, 84, 85, 86 years old, something like that. And there's an excitement that there will be new leadership coming to that seat. So you see where this is going, right? There's all over the country. If you look at there were and have been Democrats of a certain age, really in Congress for a long time, are starting to retire and leave the scene now. And so Democrats are excited about that. But there's still a problem with a generational divide, particularly in the urban areas where Democrats have held power for a long time.
Yeah, and I don't want to overly dwell on this race, but I think this race also, I mean, John Turner had been allowing for his position, seniority, and that he was a Democrat, a successful and I think well-liked member. And I think his exit, kind of put another reset on this, that part of the delegation in the state, I think.
It did. And John Turner's exit probably came as a shock to a lot of folks because he's only been around for a couple of terms. And it was expected that he would kind of burrow into the House and develop some seniority and be a strong leader for sessions to come. But that didn't happen. So
yeah, and we should mention, as I think as part of this is such a there are so many interesting things going on in your region. Another facet of Turner's position was that he came from a political family.
Jim Turner's father, former congressman,
right, which is
wiped out during the redistricting process of 2003. But yes, he does,
and still a very well-known and well-respected figure in Democratic politics, both in the region and in the state. And, it's another facet, I think, of this kind of changing of the guard piece that's going on, but also the difficulty that the Democratic, Party faces structurally in the state in managing this, both by nature of their position in the state, and as you say, the high amount of turnover that we're seeing at a very difficult, historically difficult time for Democrats in the state.
And Jim, let me just quickly say why you need emerging leaders. Because when election cycles come and go, take this election cycle. If you take Beto O'Rourke out of the formula, right, you will find that Democrats struggle to find qualified electric candidates for statewide office. It was a struggle. And Beto kind of did him a favor, right, in agreeing to run. He'll be able to raise some money and mount a credible race. We'll see how successful he is. But where are the other statewide Democratic Party contenders? No offense to folks who are running in other races, but let's face it, they need to develop a bench. They need to develop a starting lineup where when you have these opportunities present themselves, that these folks can step up and run for statewide office or run for major office. You have Colin Allred in Dallas, Lizzie Fletcher in Houston, Congressman, Veronica Escobar in El Paso. One day they'll be ready, but you really need to develop. That's one of the biggest problems, I think, and reasons why Democrats haven't won a race since 1994. When the time comes to field a statewide candidate, sometimes they don't pull the trigger and get a good one. 2018, remember the nominee for governor, little known Dallas County Sheriff Lupe Valdez. That won't cut it in a statewide race.
Right. I mean, I think one of the things that's interesting about that point is that, that's a problem for the Democrats. You and I have probably been talking about candidate recruitment since the first time we met a long time ago.
That's right.
And part of what I think we're seeing right now is that that's not only now a problem for the Democrats, I would argue it's a problem for politics in the state, in that we've gone from the weakness of the Democrats in the state being a question about, when is this going to happen? What are the solutions? Thinking about it as a problem for the Democrats to becoming a structural feature of our politics, and that, certainly in 2021, there was no evidence that any of the Republicans leading the state, whether you agreed with their agenda or not, that they were worried about the general election, that there was a check in the political system that was affecting their agenda and their planning in any consistent way.
Right.
And so, I think this has gone from being not just a problem for the Democrats, but a kind of system-wide problem.
I agree.
As we wind down here, Gromer, what else should we be watching in Dallas? What else is going on in North Texas? Anything else you're really paying attention to and think is maybe even kind of a sleeper as, the season really begins to stir?
Sure. Couple of things. One, I mentioned the District 30 race to replace Eddie Bernice Johnson. She's endorsed Jasmine Crockett. We'll see what happens with that. The other big congressional race is Collin County District 3. Van Taylor is getting a challenge from former Collin County Judge Keith Self. That's a legitimate candidate there. And it's all about Trump and Taylor's vote for a January 6th commission that failed in the Senate. Taylor is the favorite to win, but that's one to watch. You never know what could happen when you involve Trump in politics. And then legislatively, House District 70 in Collin County could be a situation where that could become a Democratic seat, the first in Collin County in a very, very, very long time. And also, we mentioned 114, but the Jeff Kaysen seat that he holds in Tarrant County, that could go to a Democrat as well. And we have a lot of other state house races out there to pay attention to. So it'll be interesting, and the primary season will let us know how things, of course, shape for the general election. But I think North Texas will play a big role in not just local politics, but statewide politics as well. Because, again, if a statewide candidate in a general election can win an area like Tarrant County, for instance, that gives them a chance of making a race at least really close. Beto O'Rourke did that in 2018, and Joe Biden won Tarrant County in 2020. So we'll see how it all shakes out. But I'm looking forward, once we get past the primary season, to an exciting election year.
Gromer, thanks for all that. Very helpful. Hopefully, as you mentioned a bunch of those House races, there's a lot of interesting things going on there. We're out of time. Maybe if I can get you back right before the primary again, we'll come back and track how some of those are unfolding. So thanks a lot for being here.
Man, it's long overdue. Call me anytime. I love talking politics with you, as you know. And next time I'm in Austin, which will be pretty soon, we'll we'll have a beer, a socially distanced beer or something.
I am looking forward to that. Thanks, Gromer.
All right.
Gromer Jeffers of the Dallas Morning News. Thanks again to Gromer. Thanks to our staff here doing a great job in the Liberal Arts Development Studio in the College of Liberal Arts at the University of Texas at Austin. Thanks to you for listening, and we'll be back next week with another Second Reading podcast.
All right. Thanks a lot.
The Second Reading podcast is a production of the Texas Politics Project at the University of Texas at Austin.